What's up, fellas? First one of these question answering things in a while. Trying to get these back into my weekly schedule because I enjoy doing them. And hopefully, I will continue to get questions because it's a lot of fun. The first question was Mike Israetel says that volume is the primary driver for hypertrophy. What are your thoughts on 10 by 10 German volume training for hypertrophy? Do you think it's ineffective? Why? Do you think that there's a point of diminishing returns that lies? Where do you think the point of diminishing return lies for volume? So the first thing I would point out to you is that Mike Israetel himself doesn't do German volume training, right? When we do an exercise, we can preferentially train certain fibers. There's not really evidence to suggest that we can preferentially train different segments of a muscle fiber's length, but we can train preferentially different fibers. So doing 10 sets on a single one seems like kind of misuse of time when maybe we could be using a different exercise for some of those sets, preferentially target some other fibers. So that would be the first thing is 10 sets on a single exercise kind of seems like a redundant stimulus at that point. The old school bodybuilders would say, oh, you want to hit the muscle from a bunch of angles. It's kind of what they're getting at in the slightly more scientific phrasing. The other thing that I've always kind of played around with, because 10 working sets in a workout, perfectly reasonable. I don't think that's excessive. I do think 10 sets on the single exercise is probably just redundant, and get better results from varying it. The other thing I've always kind of speculated about is Mike Israetel will talk about a maximum recoverable volume, which is what is the biggest number of difficult sets you can do within a 1 week microcycle and consistently recover. That is your maximum recoverable volume. That number is inherently seemingly talking about a week, but I do wonder if there is a maximum recoverable volume for a session. More importantly than a maximum recoverable volume, the other number that Mike Israetel will toss around a reasonable amount is a maximum adaptive volume. There's this idea that, okay, we have this number, slightly different than the maximum recoverable volume, small gap between the two. One of them is the most you can recover from, and one of them is the most you're going to benefit from, and maybe these are different numbers. And I've always kind of tossed around that maybe there is a per session maximum adaptive volume. Maybe if we're getting comparable results from 5 sets and 10 sets, that would imply that we've maybe reached the maximum adaptive volume, but maybe not reached the maximum recoverable volume, in which case I think that maybe just moving the latter 5 sets to a second session in the week, that way we're still within our maximum recoverable volume, but we're not topping out that single session maximum adaptive volume, might lead us to better progression. And that's very much what I noticed in my own training when I did German volume training back in the day. I've done many, many, many training cycles of German volume training, so from the practical aspect, I'm fairly familiar. And I noticed that it's like, hey, I can get the exact same results, if not better, by putting an extra 10 pounds on the bar and just doing 5 sets. What's the point of this other 5? All I'm doing is digging a bigger ditch that I don't seem to be getting any compensation out of. So I guess that would be my answer. And then where does the diminishing returns lie for volume? That totally depends on the person, right? It depends on your recovery capabilities, caloric surplus, caloric deficit, genetics, supplement status, right? Like whether PEDs are involved. And then the other thing that's really important to note is so we've got recovery on one end, but also how much damage you can do in a single set. If you look at the training volume of a lot of top IFBB pros right now, it's comically low. But they're also very big, strong guys who are able to do a lot of damage in a singular set. And you'd say, well, yeah, those guys are on a bunch of PEDs. You'd think that they would be doing this huge training volume if volume is going to make them bigger indefinitely, and volume is the primary driver. But once you achieve a sufficient stimulus, the stimulus that you inflicted in the gym is no longer the limiting factor for how much you grow. It's muscle protein synthesis. Once you reach that point where you've presented enough stimulus to get adaptation, which is more than a lot of people think, but once you reach that point, doing more damage isn't going to necessarily mean more growth. So it's like, why would they do more volume, even if they were capable of recovering it from it at that point? It's kind of nuanced, I would say. Very, very hard to pin down numbers. I've never really liked throwing out like an X number of sets per week because we're all built differently, right? So it's like I can't recover from any lower back volume because I got a long torso and stubby arms, right? So it's like the number of working sets on deadlifts I do per week is like 3, maybe 4. And that's enough for me to get better, and any more than that would thrash me. But if I told you that was a generalized number, you probably wouldn't get any better. You might actively regress. So I think it all just depends. Next question is, if someone eats a lot of full eggs, white and yolk, in the morning, is it pointless to supplement zinc at that time? Would it be better to take it with another meal? For micronutrients, right, minerals, outside of stuff I'm not like fully familiar with, and these are marginal differences at best. The timing does not matter tremendously as long as it's not upsetting your stomach and it's ingested on a daily basis. Not really a problem. I know that like maybe you should take your D3 at night. Who is it? The fella that coached Dallas McCarver, coaches Nick Walker. I am completely blanking on his name. My point being, he's very big on timing of supplements, but also you have to look at who he's working with. It's the 1% of the 1%, right? You're looking at they need marginal returns to win contests, right? In our case, I really wouldn't sweat it. It's not that big of a deal. Matt Jansen. There we go. I feel less stupid now. I wouldn't sweat it, right? There are hypothetical times in which things might be a little bit better, but I really wouldn't worry yourself with that at all. There's probably a lot bigger fish to fry for you. The next question is, if you could hire someone to coach yourself, if you could hire someone to coach yourself, would you? Anyone in particular? Well, I could. I'm pretty poor, but I'm sure I could scrape together the funds to get a coach if I wanted to. If I were to get a coach, I would probably, if I don't think he's taking any clients on, but in my perfect world, I would probably hire Mike Tusher. I think he's probably the best coach in the world, in my opinion. I think that what you have to look at when you're assessing whether someone's a really, really good coach, we already know a bunch of people are good coaches. That's okay. They produce results. That's what matters. But I think what's the most impressive thing to me is if they produce elite level results in a wide variety of classes, right? Because someone can have a methodology that's very well suited to lightweight men and lightweight women, but being able to adapt that to someone who's very different, like a super heavyweight man, means you have even better of an understanding of the training process. And Mike T's produced lightweight women, heavyweight women, lightweight men, middleweight men, heavyweight men, all over the place. He obviously has an insanely good grasp of programming, right, and coaching and everything that entails. So I guess if I were to pick someone, maybe Mike T, Shane Germain, the fellow that coaches Luke Richardson for his strongman. I think that now that I'm focused on strongman stuff primarily, I do think that guy's a pretty smart fella. Or like Sebastian Oreb. Those are guys I think I look to. I'm like, oh, those are damn good coaches. That being said, I'm uncoachable and will be doing my own thing indefinitely, as long as I'm getting better, and still am somehow. And then, where does the idea that cardio kills gains come from? I'm not a historian, right? So it's bro science, right? To some degree, you could look at it from a couple of things, right? One is that if you're in a small caloric surplus, trying to bulk up, gain some muscle mass, you do a sufficient amount of cardio, suddenly you're no longer in a surplus, then yeah, it might be killing your gains, right? You've removed one of the most important pieces for gaining substantial hypertrophy, and that's a caloric surplus, and via increasing our energy expenditure, we've gotten rid of that, so could hurt your gains in that hypothetical. Maybe that's what they mean. I think the perception is that it's just for weight loss, even though it can be a very powerful tool for keeping appetite high, keeping insulin resistance good. So it certainly has its place in a bulk, especially if you're a bigger guy. I don't know, man. I think that the people who know what they're talking about have known the benefits of cardio, whether we're bulking or cutting. But I think that's just one of those things where the general public perception just kind of passed down from person to person. It's just that it's cut and dry. This is for cutting. When you're bulking, you don't do cardio. The only other thing I can think of is the idea of mixed signals, which I'm not entirely sold as a big deal. All right, phone ran out of storage, so we fixed that. If I recall correctly, I was talking about mixed signals. Me saying I'm not entirely sold on this is all that important. The idea is that if we present our body with a strength adaptation or a hypertrophy adaptation oriented stimulus, and then we also present our body with some endurance focused stimulus, that these signals are going to send our body mixed messages and they're going to dull the adaptations we get. It assumes those adaptations are inherently antagonistic, which I don't think they always are. in a practical application, plenty of bodybuilders have put on plenty of size, doing steady state cardio, right? I don't know, I just don't buy it, especially for myself, being a heavier guy. I can tell you that if anything, it's the opposite for me. If I do have some steady state cardio present in my program, I can train that much harder, specifically on leg days, and present myself a better stimulus for growth. And you hear the argument, he's my hero, man, but like Stan Efferding would say, like, oh, that's why you should do HIIT instead of steady state. And kind of the problem you can run into when you do HIIT cardio exclusively instead of steady state is that it's a little bit trickier to manage your fatigue. It can absolutely be done. If you look at someone like Carlos Reyes, his conditioning sessions are predominantly HIIT. He's a full-time firefighter and totals 2K plus at 242. The man's a machine, right? But I think that those of us who maybe have a little bit worse control of our variables and or just don't have that great built up intuitive sense for regulating our workload, it's a little bit easy to overdo it, right? We can be really disciplined, we can do our HIIT and get to the point where we're chronically probably overworking and, dampening our training results. Trying to remember who it is, but I believe it was Justin Harris coaching Ben Chow for a prep, had him switch out all of his steady state cardio for HIIT, which on paper, it makes a ton of sense, right? That way we're able to get in conditioning work, raise our energy expenditure without sending those mixed signals to our body, right? We just do HIIT instead. Basically, it led to Ben being chronically overtrained, and eventually he had to fire Justin Harris and do steady state cardio. And he said that at that point, things kind of came back into where they should have been. Not to say that it's bad at all, but it's almost, to me, it's a warning of what can go wrong. Is that it is proportionately quite a bit more difficult and is quite a bit more taxing in my experience. Yeah, that's my rambling over. The next question is, what is your take on the music, no music during training sessions debate? I don't think it should be a debate. I think that if people clack their two brain cells together for a second, they would realize that it just depends on the person, right? So if we look at the arousal curve, the idea that people get better and better performance, getting hyped up to a certain point, and then that performance gets worse because they forget their cues and whatnot. Pretty well accepted thing. Some people lift their best at pretty high levels of getting hyped up, and then some people lift very poorly at very high levels of getting hyped up, and they lift very calm. Your music should be tailored to that, right? If you need music to get hyped up and you're someone who responds really well to lifting well, very hyped up, cool, that makes perfect sense. Probably should you probably see some benefit within your training. If you're someone who likes to lift calm, maybe no music or calming music, it makes more sense because it matches where you're at on the arousal curve. So basically, I just think it should be proportionate to that. And if it distracts you, then probably bad. And if it helps you avoid distractions, probably good. If your friends are going to talk your ears off unless you have your headphones on, probably keep your headphones on. It's just entirely individual, right? So I don't think there's a debate for that. The only debate should be, oh, should I do it? The other guy he might do it, but should I, right? I am a unique person. My training is a unique circumstance. I should assess that on its own. In one of John Meadows' videos, he said you shouldn't be hitting your chest with the bar on incline and leave a gap 1 to 2 inches. Is optimal to save the rotator cuff and put tension in the upper pec. Not my cup of tea. I think that plenty of good bodybuilders don't touch the chest on an incline bench. What I know is strength training. For strength training, generally speaking, if you can strengthen your shoulder joint through a full range of motion, that strength tends to be more applicable to other things as well. So especially if we're doing incline bench for the carryover to a flat bench, I would certainly recommend touching your chest so long as you're able to pain-free. I don't know. I think it's a perfectly respectable opinion, especially, there's data to prove that a mind-muscle connection is beneficial, and if this lets you maintain a better mind-muscle connection, then could be beneficial. Generally speaking, though, I'm just going to advocate for full range of motion unless there's a concrete reason not to. Let's see, next one. Do you choose to intake less carbs on a day you feel being less bloated is beneficial, such as deadlifts? and slightly more on a bench day. Yeah, that's something I definitely utilized more in the past of like intentionally bloating myself before a bench session. It worked quite well. It's probably not the healthiest thing. You get a spike in your blood pressure due to water retention, but it can absolutely work. And yeah, coming into a deadlift session significantly bloated is bad. Probably something just to try out for yourself. See if it yields noticeable results, whether it's worth the trouble. If it is, do it. If it isn't, don't. Max and I used to have like a couple packets of top ramen before bench days back when we lived at our mom's house and we were training at the YMCA in the summer, and it treated us pretty well. I mean, probably would wreck my digestion nowadays, but as far as, carbohydrates, sodium, intake some proportionate amount of water, retain the water, more intramuscular water is generally better. It worked. It's probably not optimal, but it certainly worked, and you could take a much more reasonable approach to that of just ramping up the amount of carbs you have with your pre-bench meal. I think it's certainly something to try. And then the next one is, how is it that a good number of top lifters reach that point without having to make every single thing outside the gym dialed to the max? Is it purely genetics? Well, certain things are a lot more important than others. You can get really far just by nailing a couple of big core things. So yeah, it's genetics, right? So if someone has a really high hypothetical genetic potential, 90% of that might be competitive on the world stage. So they only need to get to 90%. But that being said, I think that's a little bit less common than people perceive it to be. These guys who are like, okay, yeah, this guy's making some obvious mistakes, but he's also nailing some things that the rest of us aren't, right? He's religious about eating his protein. He goes to bed on time. He trains really hard, right? So I think people will point to someone like Larry Wheels and be like, oh, his training clearly probably isn't optimal to maximize 1RM strength in the squat, bench, and deadlift, but he's still so good. Yes, right, but you have to realize how many things that guy does well, right? Outside of his genetics, right, he's willing to push the envelope with his PEDs. I assume he's got pretty good dietary adherence, right? He trains very hard, and I think that we forget how far those other things are taking him. But yeah, absolutely, genetics matter. Would never say otherwise. But I do think it's important not to chalk up any difference between two people as entirely genetic without thoroughly examining the other factors that might be leading to more separation between the two. The next one is, what is creatine and how is it effective? In as much detail as possible. There are a lot of good quality educational YouTube videos about what it is. Basically, just one of our 3 energy systems is the phosphocreatine cycle. We have creatine stores within our muscles. It's used predominantly for exercise where we're expending energy for 5 seconds or less, so it's very relevant to lifting weights. It's an important energy system, and basically by supplementing creatine, what we can do is we can ensure that those intramuscular stores of creatine are absolutely topped out. They're fully saturated, right? Which they might not be with a regular diet. This can lead to just getting an extra rep every now and then. It's not this huge night and day thing, but it's also perfectly safe. It's relatively affordable if you buy it through bulk supplements and buy just the ingredient rather than buying marketing. Yeah, I think it's something that's worthwhile. It doesn't show like it's not a PED. It's not dangerous. It's like $10, $20 for a few months supply. It's absolutely worthwhile. But as far as more detail, I would just watch a YouTube video. I don't want to have to go look through my old physiology notes to give you more than that. So much valuable content. Thank you for sharing. I've learned a lot. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that people like it. I just do these because I enjoy doing them. And last question. Hey Sam, I'm in a dilemma between sumo and conventional. It seems that neither stance is favorable for me, but sumo feels safer, which makes it easier for me to push harder. Conventional, on the other hand, I'm struggling to push because it feels unsafe. When I pull conventional with a straight back, my lower back rounds on the last few reps, knees forward, very angled shins, and it feels inefficient. When I pull, my upper back rounded, my lower back is real straight, movement is efficient. But my thoracic spine kind of tingles. No clue if that's safe or not. Should I stay with conventional, which is more beneficial for my posterior chain, or should I switch back to sumo? Man, that's a tough one. without having more specifics. What I will tell you is, people will toss around. They're like, hey, thoracic rounding is pretty safe. It's routinely done by most of the best lifters in the world. You just have to build up that position-specific tolerance. But that being said, I don't know, I usually tend to favor the thing that you feel safer on, that you can push your training intensity, push your training volume, even if it's a little weaker in the short term, will quickly become stronger because it lets you handle more volume, more training intensity. It's part of the reason I like a close grip bench. It lets me handle a lot more volume that I would be able to do with a wide grip, and in turn I get stronger, in my opinion, a little bit quicker. Maybe my upper end strength would be a little bit greater if my range of motion was a little bit smaller. Sure, good and dandy, but I like being able to push that extra frequency and volume and using a pattern that I feel is easy to recover to. So I might recommend using Sumo for a similar reason. It might let you do it twice a week, hash out your form, get really efficient. And if you're worried about your posterior chain maybe being a little bit less taxed, doing lots of volume on RDLs should help with that lower back rounding. Oftentimes you're moving the weight with your lower back because your hamstrings are not sufficiently strong to do so. Maybe they're not strong in a stretched position. Maybe they're just underdeveloped in general. By bringing up your hamstrings, generally you'll stop doing work with your lower back. When your lower back rounds, oftentimes it's not because it's weak. It's actually quite the opposite. It's because the other things that would be supposed to be moving the weight are weak, so we rely on the stronger musculature that we kind of built up in day-to-day life. So I might do sumos and then also push some RDLs to really develop your posterior chain strength on the side as an accessory, or after squats. Hope it helps. If you guys have any questions you would like my opinion on, put them in the comments of this video and I will get to them in the next.